Time now for a perspective. On Tuesday, 17 migrants arrived at the Paris airport. This after they were rescued by the humanitarian ship Aquarius 2 in the Mediterranean Sea. Over the past 2 years, a ship has rescued some 30,000 migrants, making the potentially deadly crossing fleeing violence and war. But since October 4th, it has been stuck in the French port of Marseille after Panama withdrew its registration. And now, NGOs are pressuring Swiss lawmakers to allow the ship to fly under the Swiss flag. Well, to discuss all this and more, we are joined on the set by Paolo Artini, a representative from the United Nations Refugee Agency. Thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Good morning.
I want to begin by asking you, last month, your agency published this report that fewer migrants are making the crossing, but more are dying. Why is that?
Well, indeed, in the report, Desperate Journeys, we speak about the fact that the number of people actually crossing is quite manageable, because we are talking about 86,000 people crossing into Europe this year. But the number of deaths compared to the arrivals is increasing, the mortality rate. So why it is happening? We think that the main factor for this is really the reduced capacities in terms of search and rescue in the Mediterranean.
Or ships like Aquarius.
Yes, you know, there are a variety of actors actually rescuing at sea. States that have coordinating also responsibilities, commercial vessels, and also NGOs. And indeed, the NGOs like Aquarius have been affected by a lot of measures, restrictive measures, and they have saved a lot of lives. According, for instance, to the Italian Coast Guard, they have saved 46,000 people last year. So the fact that NGOs are affected by these measures is decreasing the capacity, and also the fact that access to ports, authorization to disembark people is becoming more and more difficult, is affecting the whole system. So that is very concerning, because the priority should be saving lives.
Yeah, and notably the access to ports, we're seeing that issue come up time and again in Italy, especially with their hardline Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini. Does the responsibility fall on his shoulders, or should it also be shared by someone like France or Germany, more moderate governments, to maybe appease Italy to share the burden of this migrant crisis?
You know, what we think is that the approach should be really a collective approach, a comprehensive approach. The responsibility cannot rest on one country only, or on a couple of countries. So it should be really comprehensive, and no country should be left alone, especially if it is geographically exposed to arrivals. But what is needed is really a predictable approach, not an approach boat by boat. So UNHCR, as the refugee agency, and also IOM, because there are also migrants crossing, has made very concrete proposals to states in terms of pre-identifying places for disembarkation, and really making sure that access to asylum is strengthened, and that solutions are found for the different categories of people that are crossing the Mediterranean. But again, this approach should be based on responsibility sharing, on solidarity, not on shifting responsibility onto somebody else.
And that sounds like a logical way forward, but at the same time, this is a very urgent crisis. A lot of the NGOs are concerned that, you know, politicians and bureaucrats are dragging their feet. Sebastian Kurz, when he met with the French President Emmanuel Macron, they were talking about this summit in December to help development in Africa, to kind of help solve the problem. But every day there are boats in the Mediterranean. Is there not a way to find a solution sooner?
I think it's quite urgent. We are very worried. We cannot accept that people are dying at sea. These are children, these are women, human beings, and the human dignity of people should be really put at the center. It's true that the solution should also take into consideration the support to asylum countries along the routes, and also trying to, you know, help people not to take these dangerous and desperate journeys. Also through, for instance, systems of solidarity like resettlement, to make sure, like we do from Niger, for instance, that people have access to resettlement and also family reunification solutions, so that they can come to Europe in a legal way without risking their lives. So it's a matter of political will, but what is really needed is that Europe does not externalize, you know, their responsibilities, but takes their responsibility and gives an example. That is really the top priority.
I want to shift our debate to the other side of the Mediterranean. Libya, now with so many of these NGO ships not operating or having a limited access to ports, Libya is sort of filling the full brunt of this responsibility. Its Coast Guard only has 2 patrol boats leading the operation. That's obviously not sufficient manpower. How large do you think their operation would need to be ideal?
Well, it's not only a matter of capacities, you know, of the Libyan Coast Guard to save lives, and that is very important, the capacities in order to save people in distress at sea. But also we should not forget what happens to people who are rescued and then taken to Libya, because as you know, the security situation in Libya is quite volatile, and the conditions in the Libyan detention centers are very, very difficult, where people subject to a risk of abuse. So that's why also UNHCR thinks that Libya cannot be designated as a safe place for disembarkation for people rescued at sea. So it's not only a matter of capacity, but also a matter of what is the fate of people that, while we speak, are in the Libyan prisons. We try to help as UNHCR by evacuating people from Libya to Niger, for instance, and helping them through resettlement, but a lot of more efforts, and we appreciate a lot of the efforts of the core group on the central Mediterranean situation that is chaired by France, in terms of really making pledges and helping us to save lives, but also to protect the refugees and find solutions.
All right, Paolo Artini, thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Thank you, pleasure.
Paolo Artini from the UN Refugee Agency.